Our final speaker of this session 5 will present industry examples, discusses the state of the art and gives an outlook to future developments. Please join me in welcoming Professor Boris Otto, Director at Fraunhofer ISST.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think good opportunity to touch upon what has been said, as briefly also mentioned. What I would like to do is use the next 10-15 minutes or so to get across the message how to bring the circular economy to life, and also touch upon what has been said earlier, that of course data is important because, let's say, we need to team up, work together, and what that has to do with ecosystems around data and why that is something different as the things that have been around for like 20, 30 years, where we also formed, let's say, enterprise networks to exchange information. On top of my role at Fraunhofer, I am also the deputy chairman of the board of directors of Catena-X, which is the automotive data ecosystem, and this is also why I would like to start with Catena-X as an example. So I think it's also already well known that, let's say, despite the fact that the automotive industry is usually dominated or has been dominated by large enterprises called the brand owners or the original equipment manufacturers, that they realize that even despite the fact that they are very big, they are not big enough to solve it all by themselves, right? And Catena-X, as the first industrial data ecosystem with a focus on the automotive industry, was formed out of, let's say, the understanding that even the big ones are unable to address the challenges that are upfront and are also unable to, more importantly, seize the opportunities that come along with circular economy just by themselves. The large OEMs have basically also done the business case. They calculated what it would cost to come up with the platform, as we've just heard, to collect all the data, to force their supplier base into this platform, and then basically try to embark into the circular economy by themselves. But that would have not been deemed feasible, first point. And second point, it was too expensive. So there was a need to team up. And the major drivers for Catena-X, which has been founded, I think, 4 years ago or so, is on the one hand side, trusted sustainability. And what do we mean with that? We heard that also before. It's not enough, let's say, to exchange average information on carbon footprint of certain parts and materials. What you want to do is to have really detailed information about the carbon dioxide emissions that are related to the production of a part on a specific production line. And now I can see, yeah, we heard that a lot, but really why is it important from a business perspective? I can tell you that despite of the well-known concepts of target costing, where the OEMs basically put target prices down to the suppliers for certain parts, for example, rain sensors or so, that's what they still do, but they happen to also basically define also target values for the carbon dioxide emission for a certain part. And that means that you as a supplier of that part, for example, a rain sensor, must be able to determine whether it's more favorable to use the rain sensor that has been produced in a plant in Bavaria compared to the one, for example, in Turkey. And that's the situation where we are. On the other hand, we have resilient supply chains, and I guess that many of you might know that, let's say, the automotive industry is characterized by relatively low ranges of manufacturer when it comes to the car makers, usually in the average about 25%. So you can only oversee and control 25% of the value creation that goes into a car, but you are more and more held accountable for 100%, right? So, and that basically tells you perhaps it's a good idea to team up. And we heard that also before, quality management is an evergreen. There are still many recall situations where millions of cars are basically recalled, with the majority of parts deemed to be effective by a defect pretty much in order. So you waste a huge amount of money just to recall cars and parts that are not defective. And of course, that basically means that the automotive industry also need to embark into a circular way of value creation, which you can see here. There is the typical value chain, which consists on first, second, and N-tier suppliers, and the already mentioned original equipment manufacturers, so the BMW, BYDs, and so on of this world. But what I really like is, let's say, that the dismantlers and recyclers are, of course, getting more important. And I can share an anecdote with you. I grew up in Norderstedt, or close to Norderstedt in Hamburg, and there was basically a scrapyard, right, called Kiso. And basically, I went there with my first car in order to get, let's say, a new side mirror and stuff like that, what we have done in the 90s, right? And basically, these kind of, let's say, value chain members were always considered, so to say, the black sheep. Nobody were really concerned about them. But they are the rising stars in the circular economy of the automotive industry, and that's really interesting. So the balance of power also changes a bit, but increasingly. And I like to see that very much. Right, to give an example, what we also need is that we, in particular for battery and battery components and materials out of which the batteries are then assembled, we have here depicted a part of that value chain, of that ecosystem, and you can read basically the names of the companies that are involved here. For example, LRP is another one of these rising stars, this dismantler here in this case. And I'd like also to touch here on a topic that has been the one that basically was a roadblock, so to say, in all the different activities that we had over the last 40 years to bring the automotive industry closer together. I mean, everybody understands on a rational standpoint that it's useful to share data, right? As seen here in this picture. But nobody wants to do that, right? And that is something which requires a different approach, and that is something also I would like to touch upon. Next, it's like in this context of data sharing and data ecosystems, we usually make a difference between voluntary data sharing and data sharing which is, let's say, required by the law, right? And it goes down a little bit to the carrot and stick model that you probably might know. It's always good to have a carrot, as mentioned in the beginning, to save money for recalls, to embark into the circular economy in order to be able to source the materials that you need in order to produce the targeted amount of electric vehicles, for example. But on the other hand, a little bit of pressure, the stick, sometimes might help to get going. And I don't want to end up, let's say, in the discussion whether, let's say, this regulatory tsunami as it's depicted here is needed in all the various different individual regulations, probably not. But on the other hand, to be fair, one must say, and that has also been mentioned, the EU directive for product passports and battery passports and so on and so forth, I think as a company you are required to do it anyway, right? So, and if you do it right, design it in a way that you basically meet your own business requirements, but then also make sure that, let's say, the reporting needs, so to say, is just a byproduct, more or less, of what you do anyway, right? As I said, I'm mainly concerned with bringing data together. So I have been around in enterprise data management for 25 years, and that is always why I'm very interested to talk about the data in detail, which is often neglected. People talk about, okay, yeah, we all need to bring our data together and share data, but only a few people talk about what that actually means. And just to create a battery passport for an electric vehicle, in our case, in one of our use cases here, it basically means that you need to bring together 107 data elements, of which the majority you don't have under your own control, right? So you need to come up with a, let's say, balanced approach, a mutual understanding, and also a mutually beneficial way to share data. In easier terms, if you are, as a tier 1 or tier 2 supplier, are always, let's say, required to share that data and never receive data, it's not a fun game, right? It must be balanced. So you need to, well, give in order also to get. And that is something which we also in other use cases in Catena X identified as or described as something the quid pro quo principle. So you have to give something in order to get something, and this must be in balance. And I should, in order not to make too long a story, the question is also, okay, if I hand over my data, what's the value of the data? I want to monetize it, I want to basically send a bill for that. That is not our approach here. But what is working relatively well is the fact that everybody receives data of equal value in return. So it's basically a social exchange phenomenon. And that's from a research kind of perspective also interesting. So how can we activate social exchange theory in a very, highly specified and also highly regulated industry as the automotive one? But it's also easy to see that it's not just a simple, specification of an API or something which solves the problem, right? We need to team up, and that is something which leads us to the design principles of Catena. It is an open, decentralized network, and open means it's not a closed shop of, let's say, 24 or so large automotive companies which leave out the rest. No, it's open for everyone to join. Everybody can apply in the Catena X association to be part of that. It's decentralized. That usually is not an end in itself, but I would like to stress why that is important. Catena X does not foresee a central data lake because no one, also you, won't be willing to be asked to dump all your data into a lake where you don't know who else is fishing in that lake, right? That's not what you want. So you want to basically stay in control of what's happening with your data, which leads us to data sovereignty. This is a dangerous topic. Data sovereignty in our understanding means a capability that the data owner has to define the policies under which the data can be used by a third party. So the data owner has the right to stay in control. However, he will be willing to share the data if he gets data in return to solve his own problems, right? The next thing is standardized data formats. That's a no-brainer, and that is something that we have been doing over the last, 30, 40 years. So we are well experienced in that. And another interesting thing, open source technology, because we don't want to get locked in to one of the large software vendors. No, we want to have, let's say, an ecosystem where the community comes together and jointly develops the software foundation that makes it all happen. And then it basically allows us to create something like a battery pass viewer, which depends also on the viewpoint that you take, what you see. I'm running, as always, a bit out of time, so I will speed up a little bit. So when we now try to generalize from this Catena X example, we can see a number of business rational patterns which are present when data ecosystems form. First, you want to share a burden or cost, like in Catena, but others come together in order to create together innovative scenarios. And GDSO, I was unaware of that this organization exists, to be honest, before I stepped over them. It's basically the ecosystem of the tire industry. So they produce tires for cars, but also for machines and so on. And they have also taken a very interesting approach. So in general, in order to build up a data ecosystem, what you need to make sure is that you create a data space where the data can be shared under rules of data sovereignty to produce the digital twins, of which then a digital product passport is part of. And of course, you need to have a software infrastructure in place, and it would be good if that would be open source mainly, because that allows us to utilize the power of the many. Right, so if you feel, well, that might be a good idea, I also want to start a data ecosystem in my community in order to come up with a fair, open, and basically participatory approach to sharing data. Good news is, from the European Commission, there is the Data Space Support Center, which I have the honor to lead, and that basically defines blueprints for you to take up to get to cruise flight levels very fast and not to be needed to reinvent the wheel. Thanks a lot. I hope you find it interesting. If you have questions, please reach out to me. There are a couple of contacts that are here, but you can also find me on LinkedIn. I would be more than happy to get in touch and discuss this further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Boris. Thank you so much and have a great time furthermore here at the convention. Thank you.